My son looked me in the eyes at his engagement party and said, "Mom, you're embarrassing me. Please leave." What shattered me wasn't the humiliation. It was seeing his fiancée smile while he chose her over me. I walked out without arguing. I only whispered 4 words. 3 days later, his engagement was over. My name is Charlotte. I'm 73 years old, a widow from Arizona. And if you're a parent, what happened after those 4 words may be the most important lesson you'll ever hear. Before I continue, I'd love to know something. Where are you watching from today? Tell me your city or state in the comments below. What happened after those 4 words didn't just end an engagement. It forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding for months. Looking back now, the warning signs were there long before that night. Long before the tears. Long before the phone calls. Long before everything my husband and I had spent a lifetime building was put at risk. My name is Charlotte. I'm 73 years old, and I live in Arizona. These days, the house is quieter than it used to be. Sometimes I still catch myself reaching for a second coffee cup in the morning before remembering there is no one sitting across from me anymore. My husband, Robert, has been gone for 8 years. Even now, some mornings feel heavier than others. Robert and I met in college. We didn't have money, connections, or wealthy families waiting to help us. What we had was determination. We worked jobs during the day, studied at night, and dreamed about a future that seemed impossibly far away. Years later, we started buying small properties. 1 became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became a business. It wasn't glamorous. Most people only see the finished result. They never see the years of sacrifice behind it. There were birthdays we celebrated with cheap takeout because every extra dollar went back into the business. There were vacations we never took. There were nights when Robert and I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, wondering if we had made a terrible mistake. But we kept going. Not for ourselves. For our family. And for our son. Daniel was our only child. From the moment I held him in my arms, my world changed. Every decision Robert and I made somehow came back to him. Every long workday. Every risk. Every sacrifice. We wanted him to have opportunities we never had. I never missed a school event if I could help it. I packed lunches. I drove him to practices. I stayed awake waiting for him to come home safely as a teenager. When he struggled, I worried. When he succeeded, I celebrated. That's what mothers do. When Robert died, I thought I had lost the center of my life. But Daniel helped me survive those first terrible months. Almost every Sunday, he came over for dinner. Sometimes it was roast chicken. Sometimes it was lasagna. Sometimes we simply ordered takeout and talked for hours. We would sit at the same table Robert and I had bought decades earlier. We would tell old stories. We would laugh. And for a little while, the house felt alive again. Those Sunday dinners became a tradition neither of us ever questioned. At least, not at first. Because when I think back now, there was one small moment I can't stop replaying in my mind. One moment that seemed harmless at the time. The first time Daniel mentioned a woman named Vanessa, something in his voice sounded different. I didn't understand why. Not then. But I remember it clearly. And that was the beginning of everything. A few weeks after Daniel first mentioned Vanessa, he called me on a Thursday evening. "Mom, I'd like you to meet someone." I smiled. Finally. He laughed softly. "We've actually been together for 3 months. 3 months. My fingers tightened around the phone. 3 months? Yeah. Why didn't you tell me? There was a pause. I don't know. I guess I wanted to wait. The answer sounded harmless. Maybe it was. Children don't tell their parents everything. I knew that. But after hanging up, I found myself staring out the kitchen window longer than usual. For years, Daniel had called me about everything. New jobs. Bad dates. Car problems. Yet somehow this woman had been in his life for 3 months before I even knew her name. I told myself not to overthink it. Looking back now, that was the first warning sign. A week later, Daniel brought Vanessa to dinner. She walked into my house looking like she had stepped out of a magazine. Perfect hair. Perfect smile. Perfect makeup. Even her laugh sounded carefully measured. "Charlotte, I've heard so much about you," she said warmly. I liked her immediately. At least I wanted to. Throughout dinner she was charming. She complimented the food. She laughed at Daniel's stories. She touched his arm every few minutes. Everything about her seemed flawless. Too flawless. When Robert and I were young, we were awkward. We made mistakes. We interrupted each other. We disagreed. Vanessa never slipped once. Not even for a second. As she smiled across the table, a strange chill moved through my stomach. I couldn't explain it. But I remember thinking something I felt guilty for even considering. Nobody is that perfect. And before dessert was served, I noticed something even stranger. While Daniel was talking, Vanessa's eyes kept drifting away from him. Toward the house. Toward the things inside it. After dinner, I showed her around the living room. Most guests noticed the family photographs first. Vanessa noticed the paintings. "That's beautiful," she said, pointing to a landscape above the fireplace. "Is it valuable?" I blinked. A little. A few minutes later she stopped in front of an antique cabinet. "That must be worth quite a bit too." Then she asked about Robert's watch collection. Then the antique clock. Then the dining table. Each question was polite. Each smile was warm. But by the end of the evening, I realized she knew more about my possessions than she knew about me. My chest tightened. I looked toward Daniel. He seemed completely unaware. Or maybe he simply didn't want to see it. The next question I asked changed the atmosphere entirely. "So tell me about your family." Vanessa smiled. "They're wonderful." "Do they live nearby?" "Not really." The smile stayed. The answer ended. A few minutes later I asked where she had gone to college. She changed the subject. When I asked about her work history, she laughed and asked Daniel another question. Every personal detail seemed to disappear behind another smile. Every door I tried to open quietly closed again. Most people reveal themselves accidentally. Vanessa revealed almost nothing. Driving home that night, Daniel called. "So? What do you think?" I looked at Robert's empty seat beside me and chose my words carefully. "She seems very nice." Daniel sounded relieved. "I knew you'd love her." Before ending the call, Daniel laughed. "You know what Vanessa said after dinner?" "What?" "She said you reminded her of her grandmother." I smiled. "That was kind of her." "She really likes you, Mom." For a moment, I felt relieved. Maybe I had been imagining things. Maybe the strange feeling in my stomach was nothing more than fear of change. Later, I would realize something unsettling. The most dangerous people rarely arrive looking dangerous. They arrive looking exactly like someone you want to trust. After the call ended, I sat in my driveway for several minutes without moving. A mother's instincts are strange things. Sometimes they protect us. Sometimes they make us paranoid. I wanted to believe I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe my son had simply met a wonderful woman. So I stayed quiet. I ignored the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. I ignored the questions that didn't have answers. I ignored the warning that seemed too small to matter. But the most dangerous lies are often the ones we tell ourselves. And before long, Vanessa stopped looking at my house like a guest. She started looking at it like something she intended to own. Over the next few weeks, something began to change. At first, it was small. Daniel called less often. Instead of hearing from him 3 or 4 times a week, days would pass in silence. When I finally called him, he usually sounded distracted. "Sorry, Mom. Vanessa and I are heading out." Or, "Can I call you later?" Most of the time, later never came. One Tuesday evening, I stared at my phone after another rushed conversation. My chest felt strangely hollow. I told myself he was happy. Adults get busy. That's normal. But normal didn't explain why I suddenly felt like a guest in my own son's life. And the silence only grew louder. The first Sunday dinner Daniel missed felt insignificant. "Vanessa already made plans for us," he said. "No problem, sweetheart." The second Sunday bothered me more. The third left his chair empty across from me. I still cooked too much food. I still set 2 places at the table. Then I sat alone. One evening, I found myself looking at Robert's photograph. "We did everything for him," I whispered. The smile in the picture never changed. But for the first time, our family tradition felt fragile. And Vanessa seemed determined to make sure it disappeared completely. A month later, Daniel brought her over again. I was showing them an old photo album when Vanessa glanced around the dining room. "This house really feels dated." I laughed politely. "It was decorated a long time ago." She smiled. "Yeah. You can definitely tell." My fingers tightened around the album. Daniel chuckled softly. Not at the joke. With it. The room suddenly felt colder. I waited for him to say something. Anything. He didn't. That silence hurt more than her words. Because strangers don't owe you loyalty. Your children do. And that wasn't the last time he stayed quiet. The comments kept coming. The curtains. The furniture. The artwork. Each criticism was wrapped in a smile. Each smile felt sharper than the last. One afternoon, Vanessa stood in the living room studying the built-in bookshelves Robert had designed himself. "They take up so much space." I swallowed hard. Robert had spent months building them. Daniel looked at the shelves. Then at Vanessa. And once again, he said nothing. That was when I started realizing something painful. Vanessa wasn't changing my home. She was changing how my son saw it. And eventually, she started changing how he saw me. A few weeks later, Daniel invited me to lunch. For a moment, I thought things were improving. I was wrong. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa leaned forward. "We've been discussing a business opportunity." Daniel nodded eagerly. "It's a great investment." "What kind of investment?" I asked. Vanessa smiled. "We'd need about $200,000 to get started." The number landed like a stone. I looked at Daniel. You want me to invest? It's not really an investment, Vanessa said quickly. It's helping us build our future. My stomach tightened. Future. The word sounded less like a dream and more like a sales pitch. When I politely declined, Vanessa's smile flickered for the first time. Only for a second. But I saw it. And so did she. After that lunch, something shifted. The warmth disappeared. The calls became even shorter. The visits became even rarer. Then came the engagement announcement. I was genuinely happy for Daniel. Until the conversation turned toward money. The venue is expensive, he admitted. I nodded. Most weddings are. Daniel hesitated. Then he said the sentence I still remember word for word. You have the money, Mom. You have the money. Not, would you like to help? Not, can we talk about it? Just, you have the money. In that moment, a terrible realization settled into my chest. For years, I had looked at Daniel and seen my son. But lately, whenever he looked at me, it felt as though he saw something else. Not his mother. Not the woman who raised him. Just the account he believed would always be there. And what happened at that engagement party would prove how far things had already gone. The engagement party was held at one of the most exclusive country clubs in Arizona. I arrived alone. Most of the guests were already gathered inside. Laughter echoed across the ballroom. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. For a moment, I stood near the entrance looking for a familiar face. Daniel barely noticed me. Vanessa did. She smiled and waved. But the smile never reached her eyes. A chill ran through my stomach. I suddenly felt less like the groom's mother and more like an unwanted guest. And before the evening was over, I would learn how right that feeling was. I handed Vanessa my gift shortly after arriving. Inside was a diamond bracelet worth nearly $3,000. She opened the box. Oh. That was all she said. Just, oh. Her friends leaned closer. Vanessa forced a smile. It's nice. Nice. My fingers tightened around my purse. I had spent weeks choosing it. Then one of her friends laughed. I thought it would be something bigger. Several people smiled. Nobody corrected her. Not even Daniel. At that moment, the bracelet wasn't what hurt. It was realizing my effort had become entertainment. And the evening was only getting started. As dinner continued, I found myself sitting beside people I had never met. Most of Vanessa's friends seemed more interested in judging me than knowing me. One woman glanced at my dress. Daniel's mother seems very traditional. Another answered. That's a polite way of saying old-fashioned. The table laughed. I smiled politely. My throat felt dry. Across the room, Daniel was laughing too. Not with me. With them. For years, I had worried about losing my husband. I never imagined I could lose my son while he was still alive. A little later, I was introduced to Vanessa's parents. Her mother looked me up and down before offering her hand. So you're Charlotte? Yes. She smiled. Daniel has done very well for himself. Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. Not Daniel and Vanessa. Not the family. Daniel. As if I were speaking to investors discussing an asset. A few minutes later, her father asked about my properties. Not my life. Not my memories. Not my husband. My properties. By then, I was starting to understand exactly what kind of people surrounded Vanessa. But I still believed Daniel would eventually see it too. I was wrong. During dinner, I tried one last time to reconnect. When the conversation slowed, I smiled at Daniel. We should bring back Sunday dinners. For a brief second, hope flickered inside me. Then Vanessa laughed. Not kindly. Not softly. She laughed like I had told a joke. Daniel doesn't need weekly family dinners anymore. Several guests smiled. I felt my stomach drop. I looked at Daniel. Waiting. Hoping. He remained silent. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. Honestly, Charlotte, I think you've had a hard time accepting that Daniel is an adult. The room grew quieter. I could hear my heartbeat. She wasn't finished. You're always calling. She smiled. Always checking in. Another smile. It's a little controlling. A few guests exchanged glances. My face burned. I looked toward my son again. Surely this was the moment he would stop her. Surely this was the moment he would defend me. Instead, Vanessa continued. You seem very attached to the past. The room stayed silent. Some people just don't know when to let go. Every word landed harder than the last. But none of them hurt as much as what came next. I turned toward Daniel. My voice barely worked. Do you really feel that way? For a moment, our eyes met. I searched for the little boy who used to run into my arms. I searched for the son who once promised he would always be there. Instead, I found a stranger. Daniel looked away first. Then he sighed. Mom. The room froze. You're embarrassing me. My heart stopped. No one spoke. No one moved. Then came the final blow. Please leave. Please leave. Not, let's talk later. Not, Mom, calm down. Just, please leave. At that moment, I realized something devastating. I had spent decades protecting my son from pain. And now my son was the one causing mine. If you've ever been hurt by someone you loved most, subscribe and stay with me. What happened next changed everything. I walked toward the exit without saying another word. Behind me, the party continued. Ahead of me waited the longest night of my life. And before sunrise, I would discover something that neither Daniel nor Vanessa ever saw coming. I don't remember the drive home. I remember gripping the steering wheel. I remember the tears blurring the road. And I remember walking into an empty house that suddenly felt larger than ever before. The moment the front door closed behind me, my legs gave out. I sank into Robert's old chair. The chair he used to read in. The chair he sat in every evening for almost 40 years. My chest tightened. Robert, I whispered. The room offered no answer. For the first time since his funeral, I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Not because strangers had humiliated me. Not because Vanessa hated me. Because my own son had looked at my pain and chosen convenience instead. Hours later, unable to sleep, I opened the cabinet where Robert kept our legal documents. Something pulled me there. Almost as if I could still hear his voice. Years ago, he had said, "Promise me you'll read everything carefully if anything ever happens to me." At the time, I laughed. That night, I finally listened. I spread the trust documents across the dining room table and began reading. Then I stopped. My heart skipped. At first, I thought I had misunderstood something. The legal language was complicated. I grabbed my reading glasses and started over. Line by line. Page by page. The clock on the wall kept ticking. Midnight became 1 o'clock. 1 became 2. The more I read, the more uneasy I felt. Robert hadn't written these documents like a man worried about strangers. He had written them like a man worried about what family members might become when money entered the room. I read the paragraph again. And again. The trust wasn't simple. Not even close. What Daniel never knew was that Robert had anticipated something like this. The trust controlled nearly $4 million in assets. 12 properties. Investment accounts. Future distributions. But buried deep inside was a protection clause. A powerful one. If any beneficiary attempted manipulation, coercion, or financial pressure against the trustee, access could be suspended indefinitely. I stared at the page. Suddenly, Robert didn't feel gone. It felt as if he were sitting beside me, warning me one last time. By 8 the next morning, I was sitting across from our attorney, Paul Henderson. He listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, he removed his glasses. "Charlotte," he said, "your husband built this clause specifically for a situation like this." My hands trembled. "What do I do?" Paul didn't hesitate. "Protect yourself." An hour later, every distribution connected to the trust was frozen. Every request. Every future transfer. Every path to the money. Locked. As I signed the final document, a painful realization settled over me. I wasn't protecting my wealth. I was protecting the legacy Robert and I spent 40 years building from the very people it was meant to help. And less than 48 hours later, Daniel would discover exactly what had happened. Less than 2 days later, my phone rang. "Daniel." I answered. "Mom, I need to talk to you." His voice sounded different. Panicked. "We have a problem." My hands tightened around the phone. "What happened?" "The bank rejected everything." A pause. "Then, we need $500,000. There it was. Not an apology. Not concern. Money. Again. For a moment, I closed my eyes. The little boy I once knew seemed very far away. "Mom, please. We need this." Need. Not want. Need. And for the first time in my life, I didn't rescue him. "No, Daniel." Silence. A long one. Then anger. "Why are you doing this?" My heart hurt. But not enough to change my answer. Because sometimes protecting someone means refusing to help them destroy themselves. Then I finally said the 4 words that had been waiting between us all along. "I love you, Daniel." Nothing more. Nothing less. The line went quiet. 3 days later, Vanessa ended the engagement. Daniel called me twice that week. I didn't answer. On the 3rd day, he left a voicemail. His voice sounded exhausted. "Mom. I think she only wanted the future I promised her." I listened to the message 3 times. Not because I enjoyed hearing him suffer. Because for the first time I heard something that had been missing for months. Doubt. The spell Vanessa held over him was finally breaking. 2 days later, Daniel called again. This time, he wasn't angry. He sounded defeated. "She moved out." I stayed silent. "She said she needed time." But even as he spoke, I could hear the truth forming in his voice. Vanessa wasn't taking time. She was leaving. The following day, Daniel learned she had already removed her name from several wedding contracts. By the weekend, she stopped answering his calls entirely. For the first time, he was forced to face a possibility he had spent months ignoring. Maybe I hadn't been standing between him and happiness. Maybe I had been standing between him and a mistake. No goodbye. No explanation. No second chance. She disappeared as quickly as she had arrived. And suddenly, the future she had fought so hard for was no longer available. A week later, Daniel appeared at my front door. Alone. His eyes were red. "I'm sorry, Mom." I said nothing. Tears rolled down his face. I should have listened. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I hugged him. Not because he deserved it. Because he was still my son. Some wounds never disappear. But some relationships survive them. A month later, Sunday dinner returned. The same table. The same chairs. The same recipes. For the first time in years, the house felt warm again. That evening, after Daniel left, I stopped in front of Robert's photograph. The room was quiet. I smiled through tears. "We did it, Robert." My fingers touched the frame. I kept my promise. For years, I thought Robert left me a fortune. That night, I finally understood the truth. The greatest thing he left behind wasn't the money. It was the wisdom to recognize the difference between family and people who only wanted what family owned. Thank you for listening to my story. Wherever you are, I hope you remember that real love sometimes means saying no. And even now, when I look at that empty chair beside Robert's old photograph, I'm reminded of a truth that took me 73 years to learn. The people who truly love you won't stay because of what you can give them. They stay because of who you are.